This autumn, the Chancellor, George Osborne, will be making a statement about the next stage of his spending cuts. Shortly after that, the impact of that on local government and on the fire and rescue service will be fully understood. That means that we've got a short time to try and influence Osborne's decisions, to try to make the case for investment in our service rather than cuts. Already we've seen 1,500 jobs destroyed in the fire service as a result of the cuts initiated and forced through by the coalition government. Fire and rescue authorities up and down the UK are telling us that they have no money as a result of central government funding being cut back. And as a result of that, they are attacking jobs, attacking duty systems, and making the fire and rescue service worse for those who work in it and those who we try to serve in the communities around us. On November the 7th, the Fire Brigade Union will be lobbying MPs as part of our campaign to put the case for investment, not cuts, in the fire and rescue service. You can play your role in that, because in order for it to be effective, we have to have done the groundwork. That means we have to identify MPs, identify the constituencies in which FBU members live, and we have to try and get the message to MPs in advance of that lobby.
2.5 years into an administration, they've got 2.5 years to go at best. Every MP, when you get to that midpoint in a government, you start looking at the next election in your own constituency. Will I survive? Will I have a majority at the next election? So now we've got to be explaining to them in our mobilisation, in our tens and hundreds of thousands, that actually if you continue on with these policies, we will mobilise and we will not only vote against you, we'll ensure you never come back into government again. Now I think that's a threat that many MPs, now in midpoint in this administration, and they're looking to the next general election, many of them will start thinking twice about just being lobby fodder and voting for these austerity measures. They know, even if they're in the safest seat, they know that if we can mobilise back in the constituency, we'll mobilise popular support. They'll be harassed and harried wherever they go in their local constituency. Their life becomes that much harder. What they'll want to do, I think, is, in many instances, listen to our arguments and see what they can do. So we can turn anyone, even the hardened advocate of cuts or even the hardened opponent of the fire service, we've been able to turn them as a result of effective lobbying. But we've got to be properly organised about it if we're going to be effective. And the best way of doing that, first of all, we need to make sure that we write to our local MP to say to him or her a month in advance that we want to come and see them on that lobby. We make sure that we're properly briefed. We assemble a group of our members who are going to Parliament that day. Make sure they're properly briefed. We get the briefings from the FBU, but also we add some of our own local information about what we know is happening on the ground. Then when we go to Parliament, we usually have a pre-meeting in Parliament of FBU members, and then we all go off and see our individual MPs. What's absolutely critical is that we then question the MP. First of all, brief him or her about what's happening on the ground, put questions to them about how much they know about what's happening locally, what the impact is in their constituency of a lot of these cuts that have been going on, the policies that are being pursued. Also then look at what's happening nationally. We ask them to do a number of things then on our behalf. First of all, we ask them to raise the matter with ministers. More and more MPs raising an issue with a minister means that the minister will recognise there's a problem that has to be addressed there. Secondly, that we ask them, if we're sponsoring things like early day motions, which are like petitions in Parliament, we ask them to make sure they put their name to it. And if they don't, explain to us why not, because we can then engage them in further argument. And the third thing then is to make sure that when they are in Parliament and we've raised an issue with them, they get up on their feet and speak about it. And they speak on the basis of the information that we provide them with. In that way, we're building up not just a level of expertise in Parliament, but a level of support right the way across the political spectrum as well. That puts pressure on government, and governments then, as we've proved time and time again, will review a policy, and we've won concessions as a result of that. Once we've done that lobby on the day, once we've eyeballed them in Parliament, we say to them, we'd like to meet you back in the constituency. We'd like to actually talk to you about what you've done for us, how we can follow that up. And that means inviting them down for the branch or going along and arranging a meeting in their constituency office and having a proper discussion. For many of our members as well, what they've done in the local area, they've organised public meetings and invited the MP and the local councillors along. And that's enabled members of the public to join with us in lobbying the MP as well. FBU have been incredibly successful in our lobbying so far, but we've got to make sure everyone's involved, because in that way I think we can defeat them on a number of these austerity measures they're pushing through.
Please speak to your branch and brigade officials about how they can support you in doing this. Publications are being produced which will be available on every workplace to give you advice about how to speak to your MP, what arguments we should be putting to MPs, and the facts and figures about the fire and rescue service, what we do and why it's worth defending. I'd encourage every single one of you to get involved in that campaign. This is the fight of our lives. It affects everything we do. Our ability to deliver the service to the public, but also funding for decent pay, funding to allow us to do our job properly, funding for decent pensions. So this is in everyone's interests to join that campaign, get the message across to politicians and put the pressure on Osborne to stop the cuts in our service.